A crowded airport gate is a place of organized chaos where everyone is equal in their hurry. But on Stratus Air Flight 732 to New York, that equality was about to be challenged. We see a woman in a simple grey tracksuit lost in a book. We see a flight attendant, her patience worn thin by a long day. What happens when a tired employee makes a demand based on a snap judgment? What happens when the person she demands it of isn't just another passenger, but the silent force that owns the very ground beneath their feet? This isn't a story about wealth. It's a story about respect, power, and the moment a quiet nod became an earthquake that shook an entire corporation to its core. The air in Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport's concourse, tea was thick with the scent of lukewarm coffee and travelers' anxiety. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a notoriously difficult time for air travel. Business travelers, weary from their Monday meetings, were jostling for position, with families starting their vacations a day early to snag a deal. The gate for Stratus Air Flight 732 to LaGuardia was a microcosm of this controlled pandemonium. A river of rolling suitcases and impatient bodies flowed toward the jet bridge, bottlenecking at the podium, where two gate agents scanned boarding passes with practiced monotony. Seated away from the worst of the crush in one of the less desirable seats near the restrooms was Dr. Annalise Thorne. To any casual observer, she was utterly unremarkable. She wore a simple, well-worn, but clean, charcoal grey tracksuit. Her hair was pulled back in a practical, tight bun, and a pair of unassuming glasses rested on her nose. She was engrossed in a thick, dog-eared paperback, a dense history of Byzantine architecture. There was no flashy jewelry on her fingers, no designer logo on her handbag. She looked like a professor on sabbatical, or perhaps a woman visiting family deliberately choosing comfort over style for the short flight. This anonymity was a carefully cultivated luxury. Annalise Thorne could have chartered a fleet of private jets. Her primary company, Thorne Industries, was a global behemoth in sustainable technology and innovative logistics. 6 months ago, in a move that baffled Wall Street, a subsidiary of her private equity firm, Obsidian Capital, had quietly acquired a 70% controlling stake in Stratus Air. The airline had been hemorrhaging cash, plagued by aging fleets, and a reputation for poor customer service. Annalise saw potential where others saw ruin. She saw a logistical network that, if optimized with her company's technology, could become a model of efficiency. But she believed you couldn't fix a system from a boardroom alone. You had to feel its pulse at the ground level. So for the past few months, she had been flying commercial on her own airline unannounced. She flew economy, sat in middle seats, ate the standard pretzels, and observed. She was collecting data, not numbers and figures, but human experiences. The size of passengers, the weariness in the crew's eyes, the stickiness of the tray tables. Today's trip was the final one in her series of field studies before she planned to convene the board and implement sweeping radical changes. The boarding call for Group 4 echoed through the terminal, and Annalise calmly tucked her book into her simple canvas tote bag. Her seat was 24B, a middle seat in the back of the plane. She joined the queue, sandwiched between a nervous young man who kept checking his phone and a mother trying to wrangle a toddler intent on escape. That's when she first noticed the senior flight attendant. Her name tag read Brenda. Brenda Walsh was a woman who looked like she had been poured into her uniform that morning and had been simmering with resentment ever since. Her blonde hair was sprayed into a helmet of immobility, and her makeup was a mask of strained professionalism. She wasn't at the podium, but was hovering near the entrance to the jet bridge, acting as a self-appointed gatekeeper. "Sir, your bag is not going to fit. You need to check that at the counter," she snapped at a man trying to wrestle an oversized carry-on. He mumbled an apology and retreated. "Ma'am, keep your child with you." "This is not a playground," she barked at the mother in front of Annalise. Brenda's eyes scanned the line with the predatory gaze of someone looking for a problem to solve. Her gaze flickered past Annalise, then darted back, lingering for a second too long. Annalise felt the assessment in that look, the plain tracksuit, the simple bag, the lack of any outward sign of status. In Brenda's world of snap judgments, Annalise was categorized and filed away in seconds. She was a non-priority, a background character in the day's drama. Annalise finally reached the front, handing her boarding pass to the gate agent. The agent scanned it with a beep. "Have a nice flight," he said, his voice a monotone drone. Annalise gave a small, polite smile and moved forward, but her path was blocked. Brenda Walsh had stepped directly in front of her, her body language a wall of authority. "Just a moment," Brenda said, her voice low, but carrying the sharp edge of command. She held up a perfectly manicured hand. "I need you to step aside, please. We're trying to get our premier passengers and those needing special assistance on board first." Annalise blinked slowly. The pre-boarding call had been made 20 minutes ago. The line was now for groups 4 and 5. There was no logical reason to halt her. She glanced behind her, then back at Brenda. "I believe I'm in the correct boarding group," Annalise stated, her voice quiet and even. Brenda's smile was thin and completely devoid of warmth. "We have a very full flight today. We're trying to manage the flow onto the aircraft. I need to ask you to just stand over there for a few minutes." She pointed to a spot of empty floor next to a trash can. "We'll call you when we're ready for you." The implication hung in the air, as thick and unpleasant as the stale air conditioning. "You are not important. You are in the way. You are a problem." The people in line behind Annalise began to grumble, their impatience now directed at the woman in the grey tracksuit holding things up. The young man with the phone, Kevin Chen, subtly angled his device, his thumb hovering over the record button. He'd seen this kind of thing before. Annalise felt a familiar cold weight settle in her stomach. It was the weight of assumptions. She had felt it before in boardrooms, where she was the only woman, the only person of color. She had built an empire worth billions, advised presidents and reshaped industries. But in this moment, she was just a black woman in a tracksuit being told she was in the way. She looked directly into Brenda Walsh's eyes. She saw not just a tired employee, but a gatekeeper of a culture she now owned, a culture she was about to shatter. Annalise didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. "All right," she said softly. Then, as she stepped toward the spot by the trash can, she reached into her tote bag, bypassing her book and her wallet, her fingers searching for her phone. Brenda Walsh watched her with a look of smug satisfaction, believing she had won a small, insignificant battle. She had no idea she had just started a war. Annalise moved to the designated spot of shame next to the overflowing bin, the crinkle of a discarded chip bag under her shoe, the only sound punctuating the tense silence that had fallen around her. The line began to move again, passengers shuffling past her, some with averted eyes, others with looks of pity or annoyance. To them, she was an obstacle that had been cleared, a minor disruption resolved. Brenda Walsh gave a tight, triumphant smile to her colleague at the podium, a silent, "See how it's done" gesture. She had restored order. She had enforced the unspoken hierarchy. She felt a small, satisfying pulse of control in a job that often left her feeling powerless. Her day was a series of demands and complaints from an endless parade of entitled people. For once, she had been the one to make a demand, and it had been obeyed. Annalise ignored the stares. She was no longer in the Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. In her mind, she was in a command center. The noise of the gate faded into a dull roar as she focused on the glowing screen of her phone. Her fingers, which could authorize 9-figure transactions with a few taps, moved with calm precision. She didn't call security. She didn't dial a customer service hotline to complain. She opened a secure messaging app, one protected by layers of encryption developed by her own tech division. The contact she selected was simply listed as Evelyn. Evelyn Hayes was more than Annalise's executive assistant. She was her operational right hand, a woman of formidable efficiency and unwavering loyalty, who sat at the nexus of Annalise's vast corporate empire. The message Annalise typed was brief and devoid of emotion. AT here, on Stratus Air 732 ATL LGA, currently at Gate T8. An employee name tag, Brenda, has prevented me from boarding with my assigned group. Please execute Protocol 7. She hit send. The message was delivered and read in less than 3 seconds. The reply was even faster. Acknowledged. Protocol 7 initiated. Standby. Protocol 7 was a contingency Annalise had created with Evelyn for this very kind of situation. It was not a scorched earth command. It was a scalpel. It was designed for precise, immediate, and undeniable intervention from the highest possible level, cutting through bureaucracy like a laser. Back in the physical world, Brenda was continuing her reign over the jet bridge entrance. Consolidate your bags, please. 1. Carry on. 1 personal item, she chirped, her voice sharp. Kevin Chen, the young man who had been behind Annalise, was now filming openly, though trying to make it look like he was just texting. He framed the shot carefully. Brenda puffed up with authority, and Annalise standing calmly by the trash, her face a mask of serene patience. This was going to be great content. The title was already forming in his head, Airline Employee Power Trips on Passenger. Less than 60 seconds after Annalise's message, things began to happen. The first sign was a frantic beep from the gate agent's computer. A red flashing message box had overridden his boarding screen. His eyes went wide. He muttered something to his colleague who leaned over to look. Her jaw dropped. The second sign was the pilot of Flight 732 emerging from the jet bridge. Captain Michael Corrigan was a veteran with 25 years of flying experience. He was unflappable. But as he walked briskly toward the podium, his brow was furrowed with a deep, concerned frown. He was holding his company-issued tablet, staring at an urgent alert that had just blared through. "What the hell is going on here, Daniel?" Captain Corrigan asked the gate agent, his voice a low rumble that cut through the noise. "I just got a red line directive from the CEO's office. Ground stop. Nobody else gets on this plane until further notice." Brenda turned her self-important posture, deflating slightly at the sight of the captain. "Captain, is there a problem? I was about to ask you the same thing." Brenda Corrigan said, his eyes scanning the chaotic scene. The directive on his tablet was specific and alarming. It mentioned a Code Sierra passenger incident at their gate. Code Sierra was a designation he had never seen before. It seemed to be above even a VVIP. The directive also mentioned an employee by name Brenda Walsh. Brenda's face paled. No, Captain. Everything is under control, just managing the passenger flow." "My tablet says otherwise," Corrigan countered, his gaze sweeping over the remaining passengers in line, then around the gate area. His eyes, trained to spot anomalies, were looking for someone who looked important. A politician, a celebrity. He saw no one. Then he followed the gaze of several curious passengers and the not-so-subtle aim of Kevin Chen's phone. His eyes landed on the woman by the trash can, the woman in the simple grey tracksuit. Annalise looked up from her phone, her calm, steady gaze meeting the captain's. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. In that moment, Captain Corrigan understood. He didn't know who she was, but he knew with the certainty of a man who has survived 1,000 storms that she was the reason his flight was grounded, the reason the CEO's office was sending frantic alerts, and the reason Brenda's name was flashing in red on his screen. He walked past the stunned gate agents and the now trembling Brenda. He stopped to drool directly in front of Annalise, his posture one of immediate profound respect. "Ma'am," he said, his voice clear and steady. "I am Captain Michael Corrigan. I believe there has been a serious misunderstanding. Please allow me to escort you onto the aircraft." The entire gate area fell silent. The shuffling of bags stopped. The whispers died. Everyone stared. They had watched a woman be dismissed and sent to stand by the garbage. Now, the captain of the plane was addressing her as if she were royalty. Brenda Walsh's world tilted on its axis. Her mind raced, trying to connect the dots. Who was this woman? A secret shopper, an FAA inspector, a celebrity in disguise. The reality she couldn't possibly fathom was infinitely more terrifying. Annalise offered a small, polite smile to the captain. Thank you, Captain Corrigan. I appreciate that. She picked up her simple canvas tote bag. As she walked with the captain toward the jet bridge, she passed Brenda, who stood frozen, her face a mask of dawning horror. Annalise didn't look at her. She didn't need to. The first scalpel had made its cut. The message had been delivered not with a shout, but with the silent, terrifying arrival of absolute authority. The walk down the jet bridge was surreal. Captain Corrigan led the way, his stride purposeful, creating a silent, protective bubble around Annalise. The passengers already on board, who had been grumbling about the delay, watched in confusion as the captain personally escorted a woman in a tracksuit to her seat. Not to the front of the plane, but deep into the economy cabin, stopping at row 24. Ma'am, your seat is 24B, the captain asked, looking at the dreaded middle seat. He winced internally. Please allow us to find you a more comfortable seat in first class. Annalise shook her head gently. No, thank you, Captain. This seat is perfectly fine. This is the seat I booked. Her voice was soft, but carried an undeniable finality. She was not playing a role, she was completing her mission. To change the system, she had to experience it as it was designed, flaws and all. I just want the flight to proceed on schedule. Please don't let me cause any further delay. Captain Corrigan, a man used to giving orders, found himself utterly disarmed. He could only nod. As you wish, ma'am. He gave a sharp look to the flight attendant responsible for that cabin section, a look that said, this passenger gets anything she wants. He then retreated to the cockpit, his mind reeling. Annalise settled into 24B, placing her tote bag under the seat in front of her. The passengers in 24A and 24C, a married couple who had witnessed the whole scene at the gate, stared at her with a mixture of awe and terror. They pressed themselves against their respective armrests, giving her as much space as possible. Meanwhile, back at the gate, the fallout was immediate and brutal. As soon as Annalise was out of sight, a senior manager from Stratus Air, a man named Robert Paisley, had come sprinting down the concourse, his face flushed and beaded with sweat. He had received a call directly from the CEO, Gregory Dalton, who had screamed so loudly, the phone's speaker distorted. Robert arrived at the gate, a whirlwind of panicked authority. Where is she? Where is the passenger from T8? The gate agent pointed a trembling finger toward the jet bridge. And where is Brenda Walsh? Robert barked. Brenda, who had been leaning against the podium for support, her legs feeling like jelly straightened up. I'm here, Mr. Paisley. Robert's eyes, wide with panic, zeroed in on her. My office. Now, he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. He then turned to the other agents. Get these people on board. Now seal the doors the second the last passenger is on. Do you understand me? He grabbed Brenda by the elbow, his grip surprisingly strong, and all but dragged her away from the gate back toward the airport's sterile administrative corridors. Brenda stumbled along her mind, a blank slate of fear. The walk was a blur. She was vaguely aware of other employees staring as she was frog-marched past them by a frantic superior. They reached a small windowless office. Robert shoved her inside and slammed the door. Brenda, what did you do? He asked, his voice trembling, with a rage born of pure terror. What in God's name did you say to her? I don't know who you're talking about. Brenda stammered, her own voice barely a whisper. The woman in the grey tracksuit. I just asked her to wait for a moment. The flight was full. I was trying to manage the flow. Robert let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He ran his hands through his already dishevelled hair. Manage the flow. Brenda, you didn't just ask a passenger to wait. You detained the majority owner of this entire airline. The words hit Brenda with the force of a physical blow. She staggered back, catching herself on the edge of a desk. The air left her lungs. What, doctor? Annalise Thorne. Robert said the name sounding like a curse on his lips. You know from Thorn Industries, the woman who owns Obsidian Capital, the firm that bought us 6 months ago. The woman who signs the paychecks for every single person in this company, including the CEO, that is who you just ordered to stand by the trash. Brenda's mind refused to process it. It was impossible. She pictured Dr. Thorne, the titan of industry she'd seen on the cover of Forbes and Fortune. The images were of a woman in impeccable power suits, exuding confidence and authority, not the meek, plainly dressed woman from the gate. It couldn't be the same person. But she looked so normal, was all Brenda could manage to say. Normal, Robert shrieked, his composure shattering completely. Gregory Dalton just got off the phone with her executive team. The CEO. He's on his way to the airport now. Not to fly somewhere. To see you, Brenda. The board is in an emergency session. They think this was some kind of deliberate corporate sabotage. They think you might have been put up to this by a competitor to humiliate her publicly. Brenda's knees finally gave way, and she sank into a chair, her head in her hands. Sabotage. A competitor. She hadn't been thinking about corporate espionage. She had been thinking about an unruly passenger. She had seen a black woman in a tracksuit and made an assumption. She had wielded her tiny sliver of power, and in doing so, had pointed a loaded weapon at her own head and pulled the trigger. Back on Flight 732, the doors were sealed with record speed. The plane pushed back from the gate, and as it taxied toward the runway, Annalise looked out the small scratched window. She wasn't watching the ground crew. She was looking at her phone again. A new email had arrived. It was from Evelyn. Subject: Reprotocol 7. Body: Captain Corrigan has confirmed you are on board and comfortable. CEO Gregory Dalton has been notified. He is en route to ATL. Employee Brenda Walsh has been removed from duty by Gate Supervisor Robert Paisley and is pending review. The viral video is live. A passenger named Kevin Chen has uploaded a 45-second clip of the incident to 3 social media platforms. It already has 1.2 million aggregate views and is climbing exponentially. The hashtags #StratusAirShame and #FlyingWhileBlack are trending. Your instructions for the next phase are requested. Annalise took a slow, deep breath. The public humiliation was an unfortunate but necessary byproduct. This was never just about Brenda. Brenda was a symptom of a deep-seated disease within the company culture. A culture of apathy and unconscious bias that festered from the top down. Her target was not the flight attendant. It was the CEO, Gregory Dalton. He had been at the helm for 5 years, overseeing the decline. He had assured the new ownership that he had a handle on operations and personnel. He had dismissed Annalise's initial suggestions for cultural training as unnecessary overhead. She typed her reply to Evelyn, her thumbs moving with unwavering purpose. Phase 2. Draft a public statement for my review. No apologies yet. Just an acknowledgement that we are aware of the incident and are taking it with the utmost seriousness. Arrange a meeting for me at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Location: the main boardroom at Stratus Air HQ. Attendees: Gregory Dalton and Brenda Walsh. She hit send. The deed of ownership wasn't a piece of paper. It was the absolute unimpeachable power to summon the CEO and a line-level employee to the same table to answer for the same sin. The real drama, Annalise knew, had only just begun. Flight 732 ascended into the vast, indifferent blue sky. The seatbelt sign pinged off, and the cabin settled into the familiar rhythm of a routine flight. Beverage carts began their slow journey down the aisle, and the murmur of conversation filled the air. But for many on board, the flight was anything but routine. An undercurrent of tension remained. The flight attendants moved with a strained, almost fearful precision. Every request was met with an overly eager smile. The attendant for Annalise's section approached her, her hands visibly trembling as she offered a drink. "Ma'am, Dr. Thorne." Can I get you anything at all? A drink, a snack, anything from first class is available to you. Of course, a ginger ale would be lovely. Thank you, Annalise said, her tone gentle. And please, just call me Annalise. The attendant nearly dropped her tongs. She quickly poured the ginger ale, her movements jerky and uncertain. The couple seated next to Annalise remained silent, but their attention was fixed on her. The husband, a man named George, finally leaned over slightly. "Excuse me, ma'am," he whispered, as if afraid of being overheard. "My wife and we saw what happened back there. It was terrible. We're so sorry you had to go through that." Annalise turned to him, her expression softening. "Thank you, I appreciate you saying that." "Is it true?" his wife Maria chimed in, her voice hushed, the rumors flying around the plane. That you own Stratus Air." Annalise considered her response. The truth was, now a tidal wave she couldn't stop. "I am the majority shareholder, yes," she confirmed quietly. George and Maria exchanged a wide-eyed look. It was one thing to hear a rumor, it was another to have it confirmed by the woman sitting inches away from you in a middle seat. "Wow," George breathed. "So that flight attendant, she is an employee of a company I am responsible for," Annalise said, choosing her words with care. "And her actions today have highlighted a problem I am now responsible for fixing." There was no malice in her voice, only a profound sense of duty. This small exchange was more illuminating than any corporate report. It showed her that passengers recognized the injustice, that they craved decency as much as they craved on-time departures. Meanwhile, in the digital realm, the firestorm was growing. Kevin Chen's video was a viral supernova. It had been picked up by news aggregators, celebrity bloggers, and social justice advocates. The 40-second clip was devastatingly effective. It showed Brenda's condescending dismissal and Annalise's quiet compliance, followed by the dramatic arrival of the captain. The contrast was stark, damning, and perfectly packaged for outrage. The comments section was a torrent of fury. Stratos Air's social media pages were being bombarded. The company's stock, which had seen a modest rise since the acquisition, had begun to twitch nervously in after-hours trading. In a first-class seat on a rival airline hurtling from Washington, D.C. to Atlanta, Gregory Dalton was living a nightmare. His phone was a vibrating brick of bad news. His C-suite executives were in a panic. His PR team was in meltdown. He had watched Kevin's video a dozen times each viewing, making him feel physically ill. He had underestimated Annalise Thorne. When Obsidian Capital had acquired them, he'd seen her as a distant, numbers-focused investor, a silent partner. He had assured her his team had everything under control. He had delivered polished presentations about synergy and brand revitalization, all while collecting his multi-million-dollar salary and presiding over a culture of endemic mediocrity. He had never met her in person, only seeing her on video calls where she was impeccably dressed and framed by a professional office background. He never would have recognized the woman in the tracksuit. But that was his failure, not hers. He was the CEO. It was his job to know his owner. It was his job to ensure the culture of his company was sound. And he had failed on every conceivable level. The message from Evelyn Hayes had already landed in his inbox, the summons to the 9 a.m. meeting. The inclusion of Brenda Walsh on the attendee list was a particularly cruel twist of the knife. It stripped him of his authority, equating him, the CEO, with a flight attendant in this disciplinary hearing. It was a masterclass in psychological power play. He was no longer the executive in charge. He was a defendant about to face his judge. He spent the rest of the flight frantically trying to do damage control. He drafted a dozen groveling apologies, each one more pathetic than the last. He called his head of HR, demanding they dig up every file on Brenda Walsh, every commendation, every complaint. He was looking for a scapegoat, a narrative, anything that could deflect some of the blame. The search was depressingly revealing. Brenda Walsh had a 22-year career with the airline. Her record was a mixed bag. Several commendations for procedural efficiency, but also a troubling number of passenger complaints that all shared a similar theme: rudeness, inflexibility, and a condescending attitude often directed at passengers who didn't fit the profile of a seasoned business traveler. The complaints had been noted, filed, and ignored. No disciplinary action had ever been taken. They were like Brenda herself, symptoms of the disease. A disease Gregory had allowed to metastasize. As Flight 732 began its descent into the sprawling urban landscape of New York City, Annalise put her phone away. She hadn't been watching the viral video or reading the angry comments. She had been reading through Stratos Air's employee training manuals, which Evelyn had sent over. They were just as she'd suspected, sterile, outdated documents focused on safety protocols and sales techniques for credit card sign-ups. There was barely a mention of de-escalation, cultural sensitivity, or unconscious bias. The company didn't train its employees to handle people. It trained them to process passengers. The plane landed smoothly at LaGuardia. As it taxied to the gate, Captain Corrigan's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at New York LaGuardia. On behalf of the entire crew, I would like to offer a profound and sincere apology for the delays and the unacceptable events that occurred prior to our departure today. Stratos Air is committed to providing a safe and respectful environment for all of our passengers, and today we failed to meet that standard. We will do better." It was a direct, honest, and unprecedented statement. Annalise recognized the captain's integrity. He was an asset. When the cabin door opened, a different set of personnel was waiting. A team of Stratos Air's highest-ranking New York ground staff stood at attention. A sleek black town car was waiting on the tarmac, a privilege usually reserved for heads of state. The station manager, a woman named Sarah, approached Annalise's seat as she deplaned. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice filled with respect. "We are here to escort you. Your car is waiting." Annalise simply nodded. She walked past the gawking passengers through the door and down the stairs to the waiting car, leaving behind an airplane, a flight crew, and a plane full of passengers who would be telling this story for the rest of their lives. The immediate aftermath was over. Now it was time to rebuild the company from the ashes of this one single incident. The Stratos Air corporate headquarters, located in a gleaming glass tower in Long Island City, had always felt to Gregory Dalton like his kingdom. From his top-floor office, he could watch his planes arcing in and out of LaGuardia and Jiv. Today, the building felt like a prison. The 24 hours since the Atl incident had been the longest of his professional life. He had arrived at the Atlanta airport the previous evening, a sniveling wreck ready to prostrate himself before Annalise Thorne, but she was long gone. He spent a sleepless night in a hotel before catching the first flight to New York, a flight on his own airline, where the crew treated him with a new, fearful deference that bordered on mockery. He knew they were all talking about him. The CEO, who was so out of touch, he didn't even recognize the woman who owned his job. Now, at 8:55 a.m., he stood in the main boardroom. It was a cavernous space dominated by a massive mahogany table that could seat 30. It was usually his stage, a place where he controlled the narrative with slick PowerPoints and confident projections. Today it was a courtroom, and he was the one on trial. At the far end of the table, Brenda Walsh was already seated. She had been flown up that morning, her face pale and etched with sleepless fear. She wore her civilian clothes, a simple blouse and slacks, and she looked small and lost in the enormous leather chair. She and Gregory had not spoken a word to each other. An abyss of rank and circumstance separated them, yet here they were linked by a shared, catastrophic error in judgment. The doors to the boardroom opened with a soft whoosh. Evelyn Hayes entered first. She was a vision of crisp efficiency in a tailored navy suit, her tablet held in one hand. She surveyed the room, her gaze lingering on Gregory and Brenda for a beat, an expression of cool assessment on her face. Then she stepped aside. Annalise Thorne entered. Today there was no tracksuit. She wore a bespoke charcoal grey dress that was the epitome of understated power. Her hair was styled elegantly, and she wore no jewelry save for a simple classic watch. She carried nothing. She didn't need a briefcase or a tablet. The information was all in her head. Her presence alone filled the room, silencing the nervous energy. She walked to the head of the table, the seat reserved for the chairman of the board, Gregory's seat. She didn't sit immediately, but stood there, her gaze sweeping over the two of them. "Mr. Dalton, Ms. Walsh, thank you for coming," she began. Her voice was calm, not angry. It was the voice of a surgeon before a complex operation, focus, prescient, and utterly in control. The lack of overt anger was somehow more terrifying. "I imagine the last day has been difficult for you both," she continued, her eyes locking onto Gregory's. "It has also been difficult for the 24,000 employees of this company whose reputations you have tarnished, and for the shareholders who have watched nearly $1 billion get wiped off our market capitalization in 24 hours. Gregory flinched as if struck. He hadn't dared to look at the stock ticker that morning. Annalise gestured to the chair to her right. "Mr. Dalton, please, sit." He sat. He felt like a schoolboy being called to the principal's office. Annalise then turned her attention to Brenda. Her gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. "Ms. Walsh," she said, her voice losing its icy corporate edge and becoming something more direct, more human. "I want you to tell me what you were thinking yesterday at Gate T8. Brenda looked up startled. She had expected to be fired via a monologue. She hadn't expected a question. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. I was stressed. It was a long day. The flight was overbooked. I saw..." She trailed off, unable to voice the ugly truth. "You saw a black woman in a tracksuit," Annalise finished for her, her voice flat and factual, not accusatory, "and you decided I was not where I was supposed to be. You decided I was a problem to be managed. You didn't look at my boarding pass. You didn't ask a question. You made an assumption and issued a command. Is that a fair summary?" Tears welled in Brenda's eyes. She could only nod, a wave of shame washing over her. "Yes," she whispered. "I am so sorry. Your apology is noted," Annalise said, her tone professional again. "But sorry doesn't fix a systemic problem. You were the instrument, Ms. Walsh, not the cause. The cause sits at this table with us." Her gaze swiveled back to Gregory Dalton, and the temperature in the room dropped by 10 degrees. "Mr. Dalton, 3 months ago, I presented you with a proposal for a comprehensive top-to-bottom overhaul of our employee training programs. It included modules on de-escalation, implicit bias, and cultural competency. Do you recall your response?" Gregory's face was ashen. I believe I said it was a significant expense and that we should phase it in over time. You called it woke corporate nonsense in a follow-up email to your COO. An email I was copied on, Annalise corrected him, her voice like chipping ice. "You said our priority was on-time performance and ancillary revenue, not sensitivity seminars. You believed the culture was fine." She let the indictment hang in the air. "Well, Mr. Dalton, yesterday, we saw the return on your investment. Ms. Walsh here is a 22-year veteran of this airline. Her personnel file shows a pattern of similar, smaller complaints that were systematically ignored by her supervisors, who were in turn managed by their supervisors, all the way up to you. You cultivated a garden of apathy, and this is the fruit it has borne." Annalise finally sat down, folding her hands on the polished surface of the table. "So this is what is going to happen," she said, her voice now carrying the weight of an iron decree. "Ms. Walsh, your employment with Stratus Air is terminated effective immediately." Brenda let out a small choked sob. It was expected, but it was still devastating. However, Annalise continued, holding up a hand. "My personal foundation will offer you a 1-year placement with a non-profit organization we fund in Atlanta. They work with underserved communities, providing job training and support. Your role will be in outreach and intake. You will spend the next year listening to people's stories, Perhaps you will learn to see people for who they are, not what you assume them to be. At the end of the year, if you have successfully completed your work, my foundation will provide you with a letter of recommendation for future employment. It is more than you deserve, but I believe in rehabilitation over retribution. Do you accept? Brenda looked up, stunned by the unexpected lifeline. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a penance, a difficult, humbling path. Yes, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you. Yes. Evelyn will handle the details, Annalise said, dismissing her. Brenda, guided by Evelyn, rose and left the room, leaving only Annalise and the terrified CEO. Annalise let the silence stretch, watching Gregory sweat. And now for you, Mr. Dalton, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. You are probably expecting me to fire you. That would be the easy, predictable move, and it would let you off the hook. You could walk away with your golden parachute and tell everyone you were the victim of a vindictive new owner. She leaned forward slightly. I have a much more fitting fate in mind for you. You are not fired. You will remain CEO of Stratus Air. Gregory looked up, a flicker of disbelief and hope in his eyes. But Annalise continued, extinguishing that hope instantly. Your duties have changed. Effective immediately, you will be personally overseeing the implementation of the Thorn Initiative. It is the exact training program you dismissed 3 months ago, now expanded and with a budget 3 times larger. You will lead the training sessions. You will fly to every hub: Denver, Chicago, Atlanta, LA, and you will stand before our pilots, our flight attendants, our gate agents, and our baggage handlers. And you will use yesterday's incident, your failure, as the primary case study of what not to do. You will be the face of this change. Your bonus, your stock options, your entire future compensation will be tied directly to measurable improvements in customer satisfaction scores and employee conduct reports. I will be your direct supervisor. You will report to me and only me. Every decision you make, from the new brand of coffee we serve to the livery on our planes, will require my sign-off. You will retain the title of CEO, but you will have none of the power. You will be a puppet, Mr. Dalton, and I will be the one pulling the strings. And you will do this publicly and diligently for the next 2 years. Am I clear? Gregory Dalton sat there, utterly broken. It was a corporate death sentence, delivered with surgical precision. Firing him would have been a mercy. This was a public humiliation, a slow, grinding penance designed to remake him and the company in her image. He could quit, of course, but the story was already out. Quitting would be an admission of guilt. His career in aviation would be over, his reputation obliterated. His only path forward was this road of ritual abasement. He looked at the woman across the table. He saw no anger, no pleasure in her eyes, only the cold, hard certainty of a leader who had identified a problem and was now ruthlessly, efficiently fixing it. Yes, Gregory Dalton finally croaked the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. Perfectly clear. The news of the boardroom reckoning spread through Stratus Air's corporate headquarters like a shockwave. It wasn't leaked. It was announced. At precisely 11:00 a.m., a company-wide internal memo written by Annalise Thorne herself was released. It was followed by a public press release that was sent to every major news outlet. The language was unsparing. It detailed the incident at ATL, calling it a profound failure of our corporate culture. It announced the immediate termination of Brenda Walsh, but also included the unusual detail about the non-profit placement offered by the Thorne Foundation, framing it as a commitment to restorative justice over simple punishment. But the real bombshell was the section on Gregory Dalton. It announced the launch of the Thorn Initiative for Service Excellence and Inclusivity. It publicly named Gregory Dalton as the hands-on leader of the initiative. It explicitly stated that the CEO would be traveling to every domestic hub to personally lead retraining sessions, using the viral video incident as a foundational learning tool. It outlined the new reporting structure, making it clear that the CEO now served at the direct pleasure and under the close supervision of the majority owner, Dr. Thorne. To the outside world, it was a stunning act of corporate accountability. To anyone within the corporate world, it was a masterstroke of power, a public neutering of a CEO far more potent than a quiet firing. Gregory Dalton was being kept on as a living monument to his own failure. The effect on employee morale was electric. The initial fear and gossip were replaced by a sense of stunned awe, and for many, a renewed sense of hope. The flight crews and ground staff, who had long felt ignored by the C-suite, saw an owner who had sat in a middle seat experience their worst and was now holding the highest office accountable. Captain Michael Corrigan from Flight 732 became an internal hero. He was personally commended in the memo for his exemplary professionalism and decisive action, and was promptly promoted to a new role as a senior advisor for the Thorne Initiative, working alongside the diminished CEO. For Gregory Dalton, the first day of his new reality was hell. His phone buzzed with calls from horrified board members, bewildered industry colleagues, and journalists smelling blood. He was instructed by Evelyn Hayes to direct all inquiries to the official press release. His corporate keycard still worked. His office was still his, but the authority had been vacuumed out of it. He sat at his vast desk, staring at the flight map on his wall, feeling like a ghost haunting his own life. His first task, assigned via a crisp email from Annalise, was to draft an apology script for himself, one he would have to deliver on video, to be played at the start of every retraining session. For Brenda Walsh, the day was a strange mix of despair and a dawning, terrifying sense of clarity. She met with a representative from the Thorne Foundation, a kind but firm woman who explained the placement. The non-profit was called Second Step Atlanta. It helped formerly incarcerated individuals and others facing significant barriers to employment re-enter the workforce. Brenda's job would be to listen to their stories, help them with their resumes, and guide them through the bewildering process of finding a job. The irony was crushing. She who had judged a person's worth in a single glance would now spend her days helping people who were constantly fighting against society's snap judgments. It was a humbling, terrifying prospect. When she went home that evening, she saw her Stratosair uniform hanging in her closet. For 22 years, it had been her identity, her armor of authority. Now, it looked like a costume from another life. She took it down and folded it away for the last time. The karma of the situation was not a single lightning bolt, but a series of precise, cascading consequences. It wasn't just about punishment, it was about realignment. The stock market, after its initial panic, began to react. Kevin Chen's viral video, once a liability, was now being recontextualized. News reports were praising Stratosair's unprecedented and transparent response. Commentators who had excoriated the company 24 hours earlier were now cautiously optimistic. Annalise Thorne was being hailed as a new kind of corporate leader, one who was not afraid to get her hands dirty and demand absolute accountability. By the end of the week, Stratosair's stock had not only recovered, but had climbed 5% higher than its pre-incident value. Investors were betting on Annalise Thorne. A week later, the first retraining session took place at the Stratosair Hub in Chicago O'Hare. In a drab airport conference room filled with over 100 flight attendants and gate agents, Gregory Dalton stood at a podium. The massive screen behind him played Kevin Chen's video on a loop, the sound off. Then his own pre-recorded apology played his face looking strained and humiliated. Finally, he had to speak to them live. "Good morning," he began, his voice flat. "As you know, I am Gregory Dalton, and last week I failed you. I failed our customers. I presided over a company where an incident like the one you see behind me was not only possible, but inevitable." He spent the next hour breaking down every mistake from Brenda's initial assumption to his own willful negligence in ignoring the need for better training. He didn't make excuses, he couldn't. His script had been personally approved by Annalise. He was forced to be brutally honest. The employees watched him, their expressions, a mixture of pity, resentment, and a grudging respect for the sheer audacity of this public self-flagellation. They knew he wasn't there by choice. They knew he was a puppet, and they knew who was pulling the strings. The message was clear: if the CEO could be brought this low, no one was immune from accountability. The culture of apathy was dead. Annalise Thorne was not there. She was 30,000 feet in the air on another Stratus Air flight. This time she was in first class, a seat her executive team had booked for her. But her focus wasn't on the enhanced service or the wider seat. She was observing the crew. She watched as a flight attendant knelt to speak to an elderly passenger who was hard of hearing, showing remarkable patience. She saw another agent at the gate proactively help a non-English speaking family find their connection. Small things, tiny data points of decency. She knew a single memo and one public shaming wouldn't change everything overnight. But the shockwave had hit. The hard karma had landed, not as a destructive force, but as a catalyst for a painful, necessary, and profound reconstruction. The work had just begun. A year later, Stratus Air was flying at a different altitude, not just in the sky, but in public esteem. The Thorne Initiative had scoured the company clean. The new motto, "Every person matters," was taken from Annalise's own statement and was now the bedrock of their service. Gregory Dalton's forced tour of apology became a legendary tale of corporate accountability, transforming him from a disgrace into an effective, if humbled, leader. Far from the skies, Brenda Walsh found a quiet, unexpected purpose at the Atlanta nonprofit, learning to see the humanity she had once so easily dismissed. The changes were not just cosmetic. The airline, once a punchline, was now a case study in successful transformation, praised for its service and efficiency. On the anniversary of the incident, Annalise Thorne found herself at the same Atlanta concourse. Dressed in simple jeans and a sweater, she was just another face in the crowd, lost in a book. She watched the boarding process for her Stratus Air flight. It was smooth, polite, and imbued with a palpable sense of professionalism and kindness. An agent smiled warmly at every passenger. A flight attendant helped a flustered family without being asked. When her group was called, Annalise joined the line. She received a polite scan, a genuine smile, and a "have a wonderful flight." No one recognized her. No one needed to. As she walked down the jet bridge, she felt the profound satisfaction of her investment. The true deed of ownership wasn't a piece of paper she could pull from a bag. It was the culture of dignity she had built. It was the quiet confidence that the system now worked for everyone, ensuring that no one would ever be made to feel small at 30,000 feet again. That is the incredible story of how one woman's quiet dignity in the face of disrespect triggered an avalanche of change. Dr. Annalise Thorne reminds us that real power isn't about what you can demand for yourself, but what you can demand for others. It's a powerful lesson that respect shouldn't be reserved for those who look important. It's a basic human right that should be the standard for everyone, from the boardroom to a middle seat in economy. Her story shows that one person armed with purpose and principle can force an entire system to look in the mirror and become better. What did you think of Brenda's karma? Was it too harsh, or was it a fitting lesson? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more true life stories of drama, karma, and justice. Your support helps us keep telling these important stories. Thank you for listening.